Hey, welcome back all. It's been a while since I uploaded a video around this Python. There was some lack of motivation. However, today, what I'm trying to do is like I'm trying to build an application of data science. I'll walk you through how the application is made. It will be a skeletal overview of how the app is made, the folder structure, the installations, the HTML files, and all. As we dive forward, right, I will be also be showing how to write the code for the same and explain you where and when possible. Today, basically, we'll try to cover the API part, how the Flask is used, and how the basic APIs are written. So, if you look at what is being covered in the overall in this video packages, will be like the complete structure of the application, some basic important modules of Python, like say pandas, how a function is written, how a class is written, where to use the function, where to use a class, and from the machine learning point of view, what are the pre-processing steps that we would be taking into consideration. How to achieve that automation in an automated way. Like for example, if somebody gives a file and we want to write a program which takes just the path of the file and it does all the pre-processing that is required as no based again based on what type of application it is. It could be a structural data that we're dealing with, where we have to do some predictive analytics or some clustering that we need to do based on the given data, and also like not so important, but some case of some structure of HTML, because that would be required to gather the input from the user, like what the user is trying to solve, whether it is something to do with the clustering, as I said, or predictive analytics, or just he wants to predict using some old model that he already has trained. All right. So this would be a very long video. So I'm gonna break it into chunks, and the first part of the video would be covering the basic functionality of how we start coming up with an application. So how we do that application in a local PC, how the virtual environment is created, and how an API is made, and how to test it and all. All right. So enough talking. Let's get started into the code now. So what I'll do is like I already created one folder called ML app. See, as you can see, it's an empty folder. We don't have anything here. What I'll do is like I will open my Visual Studio and I'll try to open that folder here. So let me open that. So it is there in my knowledge folder, and there we have ML app. I would assume that you already have your Visual Studio or PyCharm installed, and there is also some basic knowledge about how the Python works, how an application is run, like a simple app in Python is run. At least that basic thing. Like anyways, like I'll be showing you all the steps that I would be doing. Nevertheless, so once you open the Visual Studio, you have the folder. As you can see in my top left corner, there is nothing here. I'll just go and open my terminal. All right, now my terminal is coming up. So what you see at the bottom of the screen is the terminal. Uh, Before we get started, right, we need to have a virtual environment. Now, having this virtual environment is very important because based on your application needs, the libraries that you're going to install are very limited, and that will be very helpful because if you put all your libraries in one place, there will be so much of incompatibility. As we move forward, right, like there are numerous of libraries that we commonly use, like pandas or numpy or your scikit. So every library is interdependent, dependent on some other library. Say for example, pandas is using some part of numpy. So if numpy comes up with some some latest development which is not integrated into Python, then there will be some incompatibility issues. That is why we always use this virtual environments to keep it limited, no, so that this limited environment will be useful for your application. But nevertheless, like if you're working on Dockers or if you're working on containers, all this will be a simple pip installable package where you tell which version of NumPy or which version of pandas that you will require. So when to create a virtual environment, it is simply like Python space hyphen m venv and your virtual environment name. So in this case, you can say dot venv, or I can say let us, because we are trying to make an auto ml here, I'll say dot auto ml as my virtual library name. So once I do that, you notice that there is a new folder that has come up. So it is trying to install all the basic, the Python is trying to install all the basic things that you will require for the app to run. Okay, so in this virtual environment, we don't have anything as of now. Like, of course, the Python and all is there, but other than that, there is no NumPy or there is no pandas. If you're trying to use this virtual environment, you first have to activate it. So to activate it, simply say automl scripts activate. So when you're using Conda or you're using Python and you have a virtual environment, it is always suggested that you activate the virtual environment. So as and when you're trying to install, it will always install in that virtual environment only. So this is the way you activate it. Simply you would use .ml because my .ml is my folder, like my virtual environment name, and you have something called as scripts inside. You notice the scripts folder, and within the scripts folder there is something called as activate. So when I do that, you notice what happens in the terminal. You see there is a prefix here called AutoML. It means that you're within that activated virtual environment now. So whichever installables that you're going to do will happen in this particular virtual environment. Now, this is not the part of the code. So when you try to push your code to Git, this virtual environment should not be the one of your Git element. All right. So this is only to run in your local machine. As you move to cloud or as you move to some other server, you need to make sure that the virtual environment is used, like whichever virtual environment that is designed, like you will have to activate that virtual environment and make sure that all the libraries are available there. Uh, Today, what as I said, like today I'll be covering the API part, but before the API part, I will also do one more thing. Like I'll create a new file here. This file again is not going to be the part of the application. It is only to run ad hoc some tests. Say for example, I want to come up with a function which takes a variable and detects what kind of structure it is, like whether it is a string or it is a float or as an integer, and so on. So if you want to test some basic functionality, I'll just create one test.ipynb. As you know that this is a simple notebook, and if you want to write any code here, like just for testing purpose, you can run this code. It'll make use of your virtual environment here, and then it'll proceed with running that particular cell, or or that particular function that you're trying to run. It's still running. All right. In the meanwhile, well, okay, it executed. So as you see that we are able to execute our IPynb file. For you to run the IPynb file, you might require a couple of extensions. Like in this case, you will require the Jupyter Lab extension, which will be necessary for you to run the IPynb file in Studio Code. I think this functionality is not available in PyCharm. So If you have a PyCharm, then probably you will require some Anaconda environment for you to run this. Okay, so what I'll do is like I will write the main file which is gonna start like as and when you activate your environment and run your application, there will be an entry point for your application. That entry point will be your main file. So I'll call that as app.py. So this will be my main file. And because it is an entry point, what we have is like if underscore name equal to underscore underscore main. Whenever you have a main function or a main file in application, this is a basic way to call which function to call in your application. Now, uh, we will go forward. We'll add more functions to it. We'll add some API calls to it. But I just want to show you how it runs. So what I did was I simply written one code here. I'm saying that if my name of the application is main, then execute this. It is nothing but a print function. Now, this is also a function. It's an inbuilt function. I can come up with some basic function like it doesn't take any arguments, but I also have like this. Okay, and I'm calling this function here because it doesn't take any arguments here. I'm not passing any arguments, but I'm calling the function. So I have written my code. All I have to do is run this file. So when I run this file, Python understands that it has to call a couple of functions and it calls them. Now there is an inbuilt function that is where you see this is executed, and there is also a uh, uh, we have written one function, right? My function. So even that print you can see this is coming from new function. All right. So far so good. Like we do not cover much here, but what we done so far is like we created one folder. In that folder we have activated one virtual environment. In that virtual environment we have created one file. Of course there are two files. One file is for your testing purpose, like if you want to come up with some ad hoc functionality that you want to test it, you can use this .ipynv file. .ipynv file is very good if you want to execute your line by line. You don't want the whole functionality to run, but you want only one function to run. So pass all the variables that you require, see the output. If the function is very good, then you move that function to your respective folders in the .py files. So in .py file, what I did was I had a main function. I did not do anything here. I simply called one print and I added one my function here, and that also is giving a print. So what I'll do is like let us go ahead and create one Flask application. Now for Flask, what we would be doing is uh, we would be requiring a Flask library. For some reason now the terminal is gone. So I'm going back to the terminal here. If you see this PWSH, we have the AutoML activated. I'll say pip install Flask. Now Flask is one of the library which will help in doing the API calls. So when I talk about API calls, it is more to do with sending some information from the user screen to the backend and from the backend to the user screen. So for example, if you're working on, if not, you're not working on Netflix. For example, if you are using a Netflix application, so user input is it could be a touch or it could be a remote, where the user is trying to access some account details or the user is trying to see what kind of genre that is available, whether it is some documentary or romance or some crime and thrillers. So based on the documentary, when you click on that particular genre, you get to see what are the movies that are covered in based on the language and region again. So there is a feedback that is coming from user, and that feedback is sent to the backend servers. And the backend servers, there are so much models, so much of complicated structures that are in place, and it gives sends the response in a neat and polished way to the user, that the user experience is the user feels more and more to use. It will should be a user friendly application. So Netflix is just one example. You have so many other applications like YouTube or your Amazon Prime or Amazon shopping cart. All these applications, they all have the similar structure, but the requirements are different. In some cases it could be a streaming of video, in some cases it could be buying of a particular good from online, or in some cases it could be a simple blog that you're trying to read. All that is happening is so many web calls that are happening from the user screen to the server and from the server to user screen. All right. So for us to enable this, we are using Flask. So there are many other things available. You could also use Django, for example. So they have their own plus and like the cons and pros. So whichever is positive, like based on your application need and based on your server structure, if you are designed to use Django, you can go ahead with Django. Or if it is a simple, like you can use Flask. Like these are open source libraries which we can use. As you see, like I simply installed Flask here, and what I'm trying to what I'll do is like from Flask import Flask. Uh, I am going to create a variable called app and say that app is having my Flask module. Okay, and because we have Flask, we should be having some endpoint also. So in this case, we don't have any endpoint for now. I'll tell you more about the endpoint later. I'm going to run the app.run. All right. I did not do much here. I simply created one Flask app. This is how you create a Flask app, and this is how you run it, app.run. And similarly to what we did in the previous time, we are simply going to run this play button, and you see the Flask app is running at this particular web page. Once you write all this, we have to write an endpoint. So what this endpoint is going to do is like whenever you start your application, or a user uses loads the initial web page, you want the home screen to be loaded. So once the application runs, the home screen should be shown, right? So we need to make the application understand that what is the home screen looking like. In that case we call as rendering a home page. So when you go to google.com, you see that it's complete white, and then there is a search bar, and then there is a Google, some location and some other information. So when you go to google.com, that is the structure that you see. So there is a basic HTML that is being rendered at the backend. In simple layman terms, it is that whenever the application runs, that is what you want the user to see. So in this case, what we would be doing is like we would be coming up with a simple endpoint, and how you write this endpoint is like this. You do @app.route. You say that because my application name is app, and you're saying that this should be having an endpoint called route, and the endpoint is nothing but a /. Okay, in this case, like we can have more endpoints. As we move forward, I'll show you how those endpoints are created. But for now, like we are going to have a simple endpoint, and in that endpoint, we're calling a function. This endpoint, this function is returning a simple string, right? We have one simple function called hello world. Whenever you call this function, a string will be returned, and uh, this function is being called at a particular endpoint. Now, if I copy this function, I'll show you what this function does. It is not doing anything, right? It is simply, so I'll go back to my notebook. I say I have created one simple function. When I call this function, hello world, this is how you call a function. See, it is returning it. So if I say hello user, I'll update my function. I'll call this function. So it is simply returning that string. So when you go back to this app.py, you're returning this function. But when are you calling this function? Whenever I invoke my main file, that is when you're calling this function. And you're not directly calling it, right? You're calling it via endpoint. So you're calling your application, the application is loading the endpoint, and this endpoint is calling a function. That is how it is connected. So you can imagine, like, more and more complicated functions can be written in different files, and those can be imported, and we can reach all those requirements that we discussed in the uh, previous part of the video. So once you have this, I'll run this file. See what happens. So once you run this file, as you notice, it is getting run on your local machine. So this is your local machine. And once you click on this, when you control and click on this, it opens a home page. It's still opening it. See, it opened and it gave a hello world. So this is a basic Flask API call that we did. All right. So far it is not so complicated. As a simple Flask API machine, sorry, simple Flask API app that we created. This file, as again I'm telling you, this file is only for our testing purpose. On an ad hoc basis, if you want to test some functionality, you can use this file. But this is gonna be our main file. Now, as we move forward, we'll be requiring more and more API calls. We'll be having some get methods. We'll be having some post methods. Uh, Get methods are more to do with a simple functionality like getting some details of a user, or very simple information that you require from the backend. That is where you have the get method. When you have more complicated part, like when you want to do something like something like pre-processing of your data frame, or for your model, you want some complicated computations that should be done in the backend. That is when you use a post method. So I'll be explaining them as we move forward. But for now, like, before we bake for this video, what I'm going to do is, like, uh, I don't want this API call to be like this API method to be there in this particular file. uh, we will be having some hierarchy, right? Because we want to maintain all the APIs in one page, the main application in one page, and all other scripts in another page. So we will be creating a hierarchy. So for creating all your APIs, we'll be using a what you call as a blueprint. So it is one of the functionality from again from Flask calling. So what I'll do, I'll create a new file here. I'll call it as app underscore blueprint.py. Okay, I'm just creating a new file. This new file is not yet linked to our application. So if I created something here, but if I'm going to run this, it is not going to use this app blueprint as of now, because we did not call this particular file in our main function. So what I'm going to do is, like, I'm going to create a blueprint. I'm going to use a blueprint from Flask. So what I'll do, from Flask, import blueprint. Okay. Uh, if you notice, I'm not sure if you have seen that underscore there when I use Flask. So if you notice, like, if I want to import some other library which is not installed, right, it is gonna throw you some errors. Like, you don't have to worry about that. It means that it is not available in your virtual environment yet. But anyways, like, anyway, we are going to install all the libraries when we are going to use it, so don't have to worry about it. But anyways, what I'm going to do is, like, I'm going to register my blueprint. I'm going to create a variable called app underscore blueprint, and this should be capital B. Yep, this should be capital B. And I'll say blueprint, and I'm going to write app underscore. This is my file name. Just in case the file name is don't want to use, you can use it like this. When you don't get some things, there might be some part of the program which we don't understand why it is required. take it for granted, like maybe that is the way it is there, because this is not our main icing on the cake. The icing on the cake is to have the application run, and to run this application, Flask is just a method. So if there is some functionality that you don't understand in Flask, it is okay. All that you need is how to write a Flask application. So to write a Flask application, this is what you need. You need to have a main Flask app, and you need to call that app here. And other than this, you need to have an endpoint. So what I'm trying to do is, like, I'm trying to have some endpoints in a separate file, because uh, as I said, it is an application. There'll be so many endpoints that we'll require. For each endpoint, we don't want all the endpoints to be get clustered in the main file. We will segregate them in a one nice Python file, and we'll use that Python file as some kind of views for the application to look at. All right. So this, we have created one app blueprint, and we are calling it like this. All right. And once we will copy the same thing here, if you notice, how did we write? We wrote like app dot route, but in this case, because we are using the app blueprint, I'm going to write it in a different way. I'll say app underscore blueprint dot route. Okay. So far so good. Whatever endpoint was there in my app.py, I just simply copied it. uh, I'm just mentioning, like, I created a variable called app underscore blueprint, and I'm using this app underscore blueprint for creating my endpoints like this, app underscore blueprint dot route, and you have a function. I'll go back to my app.py. I'll remove this file. I'll remove this part. Now, what is the disconnect here? Though you have a file here, but you're not calling this file anywhere in your main function. So in order to do that, what we have to do is simply write from app underscore blueprint. See, you notice this, import app underscore blueprint. App underscore blueprint is the file name, and in this file name, you're calling this variable. You have called this variable, but you do not use this variable anywhere, right? So what I'm going to do is, I'm registering this app dot register. See, it has a method called register underscore blueprint, and I'm passing this variable. So far so good. You have created a file. In this file, you have a variable, and that variable, you're registering it in Flask app. All right. So let me save this. I'll kill my application just to ensure that we start from scratch. I'm gonna clear this, and I'm gonna run it one more time. Let us see if it runs. So it is running now. I'll close my web page. I'll reopen it. See, it is running now. The only change that has taken place is, we have created one app blueprint file, and in that app blueprint file, we have created a endpoint. This is our endpoint. So just to make sure, like, it is already running from here, I'll say, I'll just write my name here, and I'll redo it. I'll kill my application. I'll rerun my application one more time. And if I click this, see, it says hello Sanjeev. So our functionality is working. I hope that you will be able to complete this till this part. Uh, Eventually, where we are going is, I will come up with, I'll show you one folder structure that I already have. So eventually, what we are going to do is, like, we will be creating all this. So we will be having some templates to run. Basically, this will be a home page, and uh, we'll be gathering some information from the UI screen. Those information will be sent to our backend, and we will be using those information for doing our pre-processing jobs, and running some models, training them and saving them in some design segregated way. Eventually this is what gonna happen in all these coming up videos. So feel free to give your suggestions if you notice some mistake around, if anything that can be improved, that can be helpful for me, and also help I can help some other people who do not know all this. Right. I think we are good then. Thank you so much.